All right. So now we move in to India. And just to kind of go back, a little bit of background information. The British Indian Trade Company, which was a East Indies Trade Company, which was a government-supported business that went around and traded in the East Indies, which would be India and the area east of Africa. First began trading with India in 1608. So there was a lot of roots there. The English had been there for 200 plus years. They won the favor of the local leaders by defeating the Portuguese. And in the 1700s, they're going to defeat the French in a series of wars in India to take full control of trade in India. Remember the Wars of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War was the final end of French involvement in India. And they quickly began setting up factories in India as well. All right, so now here we're in the 1800s, and the British East Indies Trade Company had gained much control over India, actually total control over India, in part because the last Indian government had collapsed and the British East Indies Trade Company moved in. Now, they weren't ruling directly at that point, but they had negotiated deals with local peoples so that they could be influential throughout the entire country of India. And at this point, I believe India had something like 300 million people. Okay, India was the largest colony in terms of population of all the European colonies. Well, trouble arises in 1857 when the British East Indies Trade Company, they used to hire these soldiers that they called Sepoys. And they were Indian soldiers who fought for the Indian government who supported the British. Okay, so again, that indirect rule. But the problem here is that the British give them bullets that required you to kind of bite off the edge before you insert the bullet into your gun. And as you did that, there was a grease that they used on the bullets, which helped the bullet go through the chamber of the gun. But that grease was pig fat or cow fat, or maybe it wasn't, but rumors spread. And all of a sudden, the Indian men, soldiers, said, no, we're not going to do this. Now let's pause and let's ask why. And the reason is that in the Hindu culture, remember now, India is half Hindu, half Muslim, especially at this point. Before India broke into half, we're going to find out eventually the northwestern half of India will turn into Pakistan. This will be a Muslim area, along with this kind of eastern area of Bangladesh is Muslim and will separate from India. And then the main middle India is going to be Hindu in religion. But at this point, all of that area was squashed together. Okay, and it was one country called India. So we have this half country, half Muslim, half Hindu, that in the Hindu faith, cows are holy animals. Okay, so you don't want. So anyway, the Hindus, the cow was a holy animal. Okay, so now what you're saying is bite off this bullet where you're going to get some of this cow, this holy animal, in your mouth, because the fat again was created, the grease. In Islam, the Muslims, the pig is a holy animal. Okay, so both are bad. Okay, both are losers. And in both situations, these soldiers will rebel against the British. This is called the Sepoy Mutiny by the British, or the First Revolutionary War by the Indians. And eventually, the British will win. Okay, I have a picture here I find very interesting. You guys know I'm into these pictures. Here are the Sepoys, horse-bound soldiers with their swords, and of course the British fighting that with rifles in that style of fighting, where it's a traditional fighting style at that time. It's called a volley, where they line up in rows, maybe 5 rows deep. The first row fires, hits the ground, reloads. The second row fires, hits the ground, reloads. And 5 rows in a row fire, and then it comes back to the first. He's already reloaded his bullets. He's ready to fire again. Anyways, the British will win. And this time they're going to have to send in their army, okay? Because the British East Indies Trade Company's army, now that's a weird concept right there, I think. I mean, imagine that. This is a company. This is a company. Imagine if Walmart had an army, right? The biggest company in America. Yeah, Walmart. Imagine if Walmart or Amazon now has an army. The Amazon army marching through the streets. But that was the case. And the British army had to come in under the Queen, and they take full control over India. Okay, this is going to be direct rule now. So eventually, this causes the British to take full control over India. The British send in viceroys, which are like governors, they're rulers of each area. We talk about India having 300,000 people, which is a large population to rule directly over. The British tried to set up a fair-ish government. Key word there, ish, right? Because it's not terrible for the Indians, but they couldn't ever really move up again. And this is the same story we've heard, past that kind of middle management position. So there was a middle class. You could become middle class if you were an Indian who got educated and worked hard, but you could never really get to that upper class. And all the big bucks were still being made by the British. They set up a railroad and school system and postal system, right? This is kind of fair. They brought stability to this area, which had not been stable since the fall of the last dynasty. Was it the Mughal dynasty? I'm not 100%. But only a small percentage of Indians owned any businesses. The British controlled nearly half of all businesses. Factories employed, gave jobs, which is a positive, right, to poor Indian men and women, but they worked long hours and got paid very little, and they were exploited, just like in the United States, right, where and in Europe, where these factories weren't treating their workers well. And we know that in the United States and in Europe, they try to unionize, they try to put laws in place to protect the workers. That doesn't happen in India, okay? Which is why British businesses like to do business there, because they didn't have to deal with all the laws that they had to deal with if they were in Britain. They also tax the poor, which, I mean, when you don't have any money, and now this foreigner is coming and saying, give me, 10%, which is a small tax of your earnings, that hurts still, right? And this is going to slowly build this resentment toward the British. We know eventually, right, the British are going to get pushed out here. And we also know that the British are going to take a lot of land from the Indians, especially from peasants who had kind of been farmers, right? So in the cities, again, we're seeing a middle class, right? In the cities, you can get a job and work your way up. And sure, there's a lot of factory workers who are poor and who are suffering under British rule, but there is a middle class there, and there are Indians who own businesses. So there are also roads there, and telegraph lines, and schools, and postal service, right? There's some positives that the British bring in. But now we see that not only are they taking their farms, but the ones who held on to the farms, they said, hey, you guys, we want you growing cotton instead of food, because we need cotton for our textile industry, for our cotton, our cloth making industry, which benefits the Britain. So again, all of society is meant to benefit the British, not meant to benefit the local Indian people. And this is what we're going to find as being a major source of resentment. We say the British got all the best jobs, best houses. The Indians were oftentimes servants to the British, which at least is a job, but it's demeaning. Okay, there was this thing where they called the Indian people. They didn't show them the respect in talking to them. Like the way they spoke to them was in a disrespectful manner, not Sir or Mr. Marina, but instead always this kind of Mike. You know my name.
Are you done? Did you zoom?
So there was this just in general, we're better than you thing that was happening. And there's some weirdness there. And it's not in my slide, but I'm gonna pause again, kind of move to a side direction and have a conversation. Look, in India, there had been a class system in place since 5,000 years before this, okay? And 4,000 years before this. I'm not sure the exact date, but thousands of years before this, 3,000 years, ancient Indian society. And if you remember from early week one, right, the Aryans who were from northern Iran, Armenia, the Caucasus Mountain region, came down into India, and they were lighter-skinned people. So we're going to find that in the Indian caste system, that the lighter-skinned people were oftentimes upper class, and in the Indian caste system, you couldn't ever move up or down. I mean, it was even more strict than like the feudal system in Europe. At least in the feudal system in Europe, if you were a great knight, you could fight your way up. No, not in India. So now we have the British come in, and they play into the traditional racism, okay, that existed within Indian society. So we're going to find that it just kind of meshes, and they're able to take advantage of the culture of India and say, oh yeah, we're better, right? The European mantra of the 1800s. Also, they didn't respect things like the great Indian Taj Mahal. Look at this, one of the world's 8 wonders, just a beautiful building. Although I hear rumors that like, oh yeah, it's also right next to a trash dump. India is a really poor place today, just like all of the places that were taken over during this period. They turned into really poor places. But they would like rent out the Taj Mahal for British people to throw parties or have weddings, and sometimes you would see the Britons like taking a hammer and a chisel and like pulling off part of this historic Indian building and like taking it home as a souvenir. They were disrespectful um, towards the Indians. And look, I kind of skipped right over this, but one of the problems with making them grow what works for Britain but not works for them is that when crop failure hits and you're not able to get as much yield as you're used to, right? You're used to a certain amount of rice or a certain amount of wheat for your bread, and all of a sudden something happens, you only get half that. Now we have starvation. Now we can't eat cotton, right? So if they had that extra food, which maybe they would have sold, okay, now when the famine hits, well, I still have enough food for myself, my people, right? So this is also part of the negatives of European rule over over the Indians during this period.